Ireland's 31st webinar, the topic of which is Integrated Project Delivery by Digby Christian from Sutter Health. If you have a question, please type it in the question box and we will consolidate and ask Digby in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. The speaker for today is Digby Christian from Sutter Health. Digby is the Director of Integrated Lean Project Delivery at Sutter Health. He trains and mentors Sutter's 95-strong project delivery staff on lean integrated project delivery best practices and supports and oversees their implementation across Sutter's highest risk projects. He leads a cross-discipline team of 20 charged with setting up and supporting processes to continuously improve the work environment of a department of 150 staff members. He serves on the National Board of the Lean Construction Institute, whose vision is the transformation of capital project delivery across the United States and beyond to benefit all stakeholders, and attends and speaks regularly at LCI events in the United States and abroad. He heads up the LCI Owners Community of Practice in the Bay Area of Northern California, a forum for owners who are already on the journey to transform capital project delivery for their organizations. Digby took over and transformed the delivery processes on the $2 billion Van Ness and Geary Campus Hospital and the $600 million Mission Bernal Campus Hospital. This included updating and renegotiating both IFOA, IPD contracts and implementing best practice work planning and cost tracking practices. Both projects have subsequently been delivered as requested, on time and on budget. He managed the Sutter Health Eden Medical Centre project, which was a landmark in Sutter's lean IPD journey, being the first major project in the United States to execute a multi-party shared risk agreement. I will now pass you over to Digby to start his presentation.
All right, thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. So let's get started. So I'm gonna go over it's my version of trying to summarize like all that Sutter's done over the last 12, 15, maybe you could even go say 20 years in a way that maybe is digestible. I'm not sure if it'll feel like drinking from a fire hose or not, but type your questions in and I'll probably try to address them at the end. And let's see how this goes. So I'm going to go over the concept, the principles, and the key methods that we've implemented. And so I'll say a little bit about who Sutter is. And okay, so the next 40 minutes, just going to firstly, why would you want to listen to any of this? Why would you want to pay attention? I'm going to go over there. This would be the basic concept around project delivery at Sutter Health. Two principles we try to apply across all of our major projects, and 4 key methods that I would recommend you take on if you're trying to transform project delivery. And then we'll get to questions. So first I'll go over who is Sutter, what have they done, and why would you want to listen to any of this? Now, some of you may know this, but I'm just assuming some might not, so you have to get some context for why we've done what we've done. Sutter Health, and you are there, and we are here, and we are only here in Northern California. We serve an area and a population about 2/3 that of Ireland. It's a pretty diagram that they have available for us, and the island more or less to scale. And we're a pretty big organization, lots of patients, many births, many employees, many physicians, and a ton of assets that we build and reinvest in every year. And we spend about $700 million a year building new assets, maintaining and reinvesting and refreshing the existing assets that we have. So back in the day, there was some bad events, earthquake-wise, in the 80s and the 90s in California. And then to summarize a long and complicated story, we basically got a letter from the state that said, please replace all your hospitals so they don't fall down like these did. Sincerely yours, as the government. P.S. No money. And so we had to figure out how to do this. And one of the things that a couple of senior managers who were at Sutter a few years before I was started to do some research. into large-scale capital project delivery. And it wasn't too impressive. So I'm going to summarize some of the academic third-party research around major capital project delivery in the world. And so you could go back into '87. There was a famous report back then called The Anatomy of Major Projects, a study of the reality of project management, which showed, it was a long report, but in there, one of its summary statements were like, when they looked at 3,500 projects, they saw that cost overruns are just normal and typically run between 40 and 200% of the original budget. And in 2000, jumped one line. So then 2002, Fleaberg's Understanding Costs in Public Works, Error or Lie, concluded that 90% of projects overrun their budgets and at an average rate of 28%. And I mean, if you know anything about HS2, there you go. Same thing that's been happening for decades, happening again. 2009, from the General Accounting Office in the US government, very much focused on healthcare systems. The Veterans Affairs healthcare system is a major federal healthcare system. They noticed that 18 of the 32 projects of cost has gone up. 5 of them, the cost overruns are over 100%. 11 of the 32 are running late. 4 of these are running over 2 years late. And then 2012, the Construction Industry Institute looked at their database of projects. These are now smaller projects, average size 65 million. They did this chart, which I'll just focus on the bottom left-hand corner, which is the projects that met their targets. So only 30% of those projects met or exceeded their cost and schedule goals, which meant like 70% were late and or over budget. And so in a sense, you're saying you're from an academic third-party point of view, Sutter was looking at an industry where we were probably going to be late and we were probably going to be over budget. And Lord knows what we were going to have to do in terms of compromising the scope. And we were looking at maybe having to spend, at that point, which is in the late 2000s, maybe spending $8 billion over the next 10 to 15 years. And that was going to be a huge stretch because it's all going to have to be self-financed. And the idea that might typically overrun by 20 to 100% and be years late on a significant proportion of those projects was kind of terrifying. So in general, project delivery has a failure rate of 70%. And so we changed a whole bunch of different things about how to do capital project delivery. And so I'm just going to quickly go over so did it change? Did we beat that 70% failure rate? So between 2007 and 2019, which is the period in which I would say that's the period during which, and it would now, of course, include 2020, we changed the way we deliver our major capital projects. So we built a whole bunch of different projects, and these are some photographs of some of the 25. As you can see, we're not doing a repetitive construction. We're building every time unique structures, sometimes out in greenfield sites, sometimes in urban sites, sometimes low-rise, sometimes high-rise, sometimes non-acute, sometimes extremely acute. And so a track record, we invested about $4.7 billion in these projects. That's in 2019 dollars. And in aggregate, they came in 5% under budget. And so 23 of those 25 projects were on or under budget and on time or early. And one project was a bit late, and one project was a bit over budget. And most importantly, from an owner's perspective, we didn't make any scope compromises. We didn't conspire with a team to gut the building or compromise the vision in order to make it look like the projects were on time or on budget. And so that would be, if you quickly getting ahead of me and doing the math, is a 92% success rate. And it's super important for us, no scope compromises. And just to emphasize, on budget for us means delivered for the amount of money that the board gave to us, probably at the end of schematic design, sometimes not quite at the end of schematic design. And on time, based on the date we told the board when we went to ask for the money, when the project would be open. Some of the data in the industry is kind of messy. So sometimes people will say a project's on budget because they finally delivered it, having gone back to the board 3 times to ask for more money as they uncovered a whole bunch of things they didn't really understand when they initially went to ask for the money. We try not to do that. So if you look at Sutter Health versus the world right now, so you have the world of project delivery has a 70% failure rate, and Sutter Health has a 92% success rate. So something transformatively different is going on at Sutter Health. Now, I know all of you who are on the call, I mean, a lot of people work in the 30% area where projects are successful, but I'm just saying from a broader perspective, the industry as a whole doesn't have a great success rate. And from an owner or funder point of view, that's really scary, especially when you're doing major projects, because it can kind of put your whole organization into chaos if a major project goes over budget or runs very late. You typically have to maybe cancel the rest of your capital program, and that can upset all of your projections around how you're going to run your business over the next few years. So with that said, so in a sense, I'm saying that like one of the reasons why you might want to listen to like what Sutter's been doing is because why would you pick up a book called The Warren Buffett Way? Well, because Warren Buffett's quite famous and he's a very good investor. Why would you pick up another book you might be more familiar with, The Toyota Way? Well, you pick it up because Toyota is a well-known company and they're a very successful company. And so maybe one day there will be a book called The Sutter Way. It doesn't exist right now, but if there was, that might be a book worth reading. So I try to boil it down into 1 concept, 2 principles, and 4 key methods. It would have been neater if there was only 3 key methods, but honestly, there's more than 4. But I thought it would get a little weird if it was 1 concept, 2 principles, and 45 key methods, because that would be a very long presentation. So I'll start with the concept. A lot of people talk about project delivery methods and concepts, and they talk about contracts. Well, contracts aren't really a conceptual model of project delivery. What you want to have in your head is like, at its basic premise, what is capital project delivery about really? And the reason why conceptual models or mental models are important is because they actually can drive bad decision making or good decision making based on how good the mental model is. So my example is washing your hands. Now, I will confess, for many years, I thought that there was something in soap that killed bacteria. And so when I used to, my mental model was that this is what hand washing is about. So I would really get a lot of soap all over the skin of my hands and wrists, and then quickly rinse it off thinking, I got it. I killed all the germs, good old soap. As I've got older, I finally actually bothered to read about it. What kills germs is the friction in the washing. And the soap is really there mainly to help keep your hands from getting too dry, make it a more pleasant experience for washing your hands, etc., and a little bit of moisturization. And it's really the friction. And what kills bacteria, as we have more and more signs around our bathrooms around the world now, many of you probably know, is at least 30 seconds of significant friction is what kills bacteria. So now I wash my hands completely different. I have a different mental model of what hand washing is, and I make different decisions. So what I'm going to propose is an accurate conceptual model of capital project delivery, and it starts to tell you where to focus, and then a little bit about where you need to develop better methods. So it's really, capital project delivery is really 4 phases of value delivery. There's this early phase, which is often not even acknowledged, called value definition, where you're trying to figure out what are you trying to achieve operationally. And you might not even be talking much about a building or an infrastructure project at this point. It's like, what are you trying to improve? What are you trying to make better? Are you trying to serve more patients? Are you trying to enter a new region? Are you trying to improve commute times? What are you trying to do? And then after that, you start to draw things and sketch things and model things. And we often call this design, but in its pure form, I would refer to it as representation. It could be a sketch, it could be a model, it could be a BIM model, it could be very conceptual, it could be very detailed. And once you check that representation based on your modeling will give you the value that you're trying to achieve, and you go through this thing called the boundary realization, which is like you stop, in a sense, drawing now, and you start doing things. You start buying items, you start assembling items, you start delivering items, you start activating items, otherwise known as construction and commissioning. And then if you've done a good job of representation, you've done a good job of realization, and you've done a good job of connecting them all together, you get to the point where you should be able to capture the value out of the asset that you spent all this time and effort delivering. And honestly, and so objectively, the single consistent definition of success across all project types in all regions and at all scales is, are you capturing the value you defined at the beginning? And that would be success. And so that's the conceptual model, and it tells you a little bit about how much attention you should pay to value definition and the quality of representation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So but the reality of our world is based on my experience of projects that haven't gone well, and my reading is you basically have an early phase called unchecked dreaming, where people talk about these things they would love to have but can't afford, but they won't talk about the fact that they can't afford it, and it breaks the law, and it can't, regulatory point of view, it's impossible. So they have this phase called unchecked dreaming. And then this is followed by this design phase where drawings are for intent only, and you get to define intent any way you think works for you. And then you hand it over to another group of people who, and you go through a boundary called the point of no return, at which if those two phases were pretty bad, well, you're going to build it anyway, because who's going to cancel the project? So you go this phase called salvage what you can. And then ultimately you get to this thing at the end, which owners are often good at. You pretend this is what you wanted in the first place. Governments are good at it as well. And then you sort of like label it success, and it becomes kind of more of a marketing campaign than something that's real. And so unfortunately, that's often the world of major capital projects, and it's quite stressful. But people are smart, and they figure out how to keep making money out of a broken system. So I co-authored a paper a few years ago. If you ever, there's a link there. You can go read it if you want. But basically, I talked about this as maybe a start point. You deliver the right project, and then you deliver the project in the right way. And if you do that, everything's good. So it basically gives a clue, and I'll get to this in a minute, but you really need to understand your project at the beginning of a project and get everybody to understand the project in the same way. So that was one concept summarized by this diagram. So I'll get to the two principles that are worth bringing to all projects. And some of these two principles are pretty obvious, but it's good to have them in your mind when you're thinking about everything that you're doing on a capital project. So this is like shameless stealing moment. I stole a bunch of this from this book. This is a great book if you want to get your head around a good kind of conceptual basis for what lean is in capital projects. So it's a great book by Nicholas Modig and Paul Ostrom. Specifically, I stole some diagrams. So the question before you is, like, what are the two prerequisites for a successful game of football? And people might say, oh, you need a good coach, you want to use the 4-2-4 system, great strategies, et cetera, but those are not really prerequisites. The prerequisites actually for a successful game of football are much more fundamental, and they're often so fundamental in our world that we forget them. So everyone can see the whole pitch all the time, so there's no hills and divots. You can always see the whole pitch all the time. And everyone is abiding by the same set of rules. And then a good game of football can take place. And essentially you're thinking, so what it's saying, there is this element of clarity around, you can see the whole pitch, and there's this element of aligned. We're all using the same rules, which are so obvious, they're basically not really considered that much. So this is more like what capital project delivery really is. You have a bunch of different companies and entities and disciplines all playing their own version of football, sometimes inside their own tents, not really connecting with the rest of the team. And you have other people, maybe sometimes a general superintendent, project manager, or an owner representative project manager, trying to get everybody to play and kick the ball in the same direction. And everybody's like, they try to do that for a little bit, and suddenly they remember what's in their own contract, and they run back into their own tent, start kicking the ball into their own small goal inside their own tent. And it gets chaotic. But people who are far away from our world don't know this. They think the world looks like this, but we know the world looks a little bit more like this. And there's a lot of conflict, a lot of fighting on projects, which you can clean up. So So the two principles around are really like this. You've got to have clarity about what the rules of the game are. You have clarity what winning is, like what's success going to look like on a project. And I would say that that's clarity. You need the principles, bring as much clarity as possible to a project team. Right, here's the rules of the game for all of us, same set of rules for all of us. And this is what success for the project looks like. It's going to be the same definition of success for all of us. We're not going to have individual pieces of success based on our own company's specific sub-scope of the whole project as a whole. And we're all going to have the same rules, and we're all going to have the same definition of winning. So we're aligned. So the clarity is about what the rules are and what success and what winning looks like. And alignment is same rules for everybody, and everybody's going to benefit by achieving the same definition of winning. So we're all heading in the same direction. Those are some useful diagrams that emphasize the point there. So in a sense, what we're trying to do is go from this world in the bottom left to this world in the top right. And we're going to do it by bringing clarity and alignment everywhere we can to the project delivery model. And if you've been, and I'm sure many of you have been on real projects, you often are trying to achieve, you have your own contract with its own rules, and you try to make it help the whole project, but it can get very, very tense at times where you run into, you're conflicted between those two goals, and you kind of have to, and it's a very difficult environment to work in. So I'm definitely not saying that projects fail because people are bad. Projects fail because the system is crazy, and it's amazing how well people perform considering how crazy the world that they're dropped into. So that's the one concept, which is a little bit earlier. Then we have the two principles. And now we get to something a little bit more pragmatic, which is 4 key methods. So I'm going to take a pause right now, so a sip of coffee. Okay, so key method number 1, understand your project, which I kind of set up a little earlier. So this is my, I really enjoy this. It's a great way of remembering what we mean by understanding your project. With a nice picture on the left, some of you might know this one already, but here is the caption. This is stolen shamelessly from Gary Larson. Suddenly, a heated exchange took place between the king and the moat contractor. And the conversation is going on along the lines of like, what do you mean I built the moat in the wrong place? It clearly says here you need a moat 3 feet from the wall. And the king says like, no, it needs to be outside the wall. And the moat contractor saying it doesn't, that's not what it says here. And the king says like, who ever heard of a moat being inside your wall? Well, you picked me. How do you think you're going to build a moat outside the wall for the price, the amount of money you have? This is the moat you asked for, and this is the moat you're getting. And the king's going, this is crazy. And so this is an idea of like, maybe there'd been an earlier discussion about like what the king was trying to achieve with the moat, which is to stop people attacking and destroying his castle. It might have been very clear, oh, you need the moat outside the castle, just checking outside the castle. And the king would say, yes, please, outside the castle. And then they would have a conversation about like how much money that's going to take, and could they come up with something creative to figure out how to get a moat outside the castle without blowing anyone's budget. So that's the idea, is you want to spend some time really getting the team to understand the project, and hopefully in the sense of why the project's being built and what the intent is. So in a sense, it's this value definition phase, and specifically there's an element within that called conditions of satisfaction. The important distinction here is value definition and value capture is all about, is like maybe an operational definition, like how much are you trying to lower the cost of delivering care to a community? So you build a new kind of clinic. And so the operational value is all about cost of care. Now, unless you're in an advanced like 3P, long lease, 50-year lease kind of capital project, the team that designs and builds a project will typically not be around during the operational phase after the project. So what you try to do is say, okay, this is the value I need to get out of this building. In this case, we're talking about buildings from my world, but here's the kind of building that can do that. And then we're going to tie the team to the building. And so the conditions of satisfaction are really around the scope of the building and maybe some constraints on money and time. So the value you want to achieve is operational value, and then you're going to build a certain building, and you're going to tie the team to some conditions of satisfaction around that building. And so it's like a proxy for getting the later value. So basically, this is what I call understand your project. So in general terms, value definition involves identifying all the key stakeholders, which can be difficult, understanding all the people who care about the outcome and figuring out with those people what they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it. This gives a deep understanding for coming up with some optimal solutions for the built environment. And then conditions of satisfaction are more like, what is the scope that's going to be required? How much time do we have to get this done? How much money is available to get this done? And is there anything else for this project that's also important? In buildings and energy world, it could be a LEED certification. It could be satisfying a whole bunch of entitlements with the local jurisdiction. But to give you an example, just from this is a very hypothetical example, you could say there might be the elders group of a coastal town. They're sick of all the people who die in shipwrecks off their coast. It's terrible for tourism and trade, and they would like to get more trade and tourism. So that's a value definition. That's what they want to achieve with their project. The conditions of satisfaction might be like, it will be a lighthouse that will operate for 100 years. That will be its design spec. It will be open and working within a year of today, because that's when they want it open and working, ready for the next storm season. And we only have 1,000 gold pieces in the treasury, so it has to cost less than that. And in order to work, we want ships that are 100 miles away to already see that there are rocks in this region. So basically, that's to give you the idea of figuring out what the value is and figuring out the conditions of satisfaction to align with that, and then tying the team to the conditions of satisfaction in some form. And we'll get to that in a minute. And that brings clarity to everyone. And this is actually pretty rare on projects that people in general across a project understand this kind of singular vision for a project. So at Sutter Health, like what this might look like in our world when we're doing a very complicated large building is we will do a validation study. And so in this case, this is 400 pages of work and it cost ultimately about 1 to 2% of the ultimate project budget to put it together. So when we say understand your project, we really want to understand our projects in a great deal of detail. And we've uncovered as much as we can about all of the problems that might be involved that need to be taken care of with building a building and what it's going to do. And then this is before we go to the board to ask for the money for the project. We'll have a conceptual idea of how much we think it's going to cost very early. And then we're just doing this huge effort to confirm that. And that's what we present to the board. Not 400 pages, but an abstract of that and the money. And then we go forward and then we build based on that. So we don't, back in the day, we didn't do that and it caused us a lot of trouble. And so now we do this and we have a lot less trouble. So we spend real money to understand our project. So talking about the conditions of satisfaction and trying to work with that, tie the team to that, we execute what we call a smart business deal on our projects inside our contract. And as I go into a little bit of the details of this, I'm not saying you must do this, but this is an ideal, and it's good to try and be in an environment where you get as close to this as you can. So basically, we do this because companies follow the money. Might not motivate individual people day to day, but definitely it motivates the people who run the companies who can help project owners and project managers to work with the individuals on a project because they need behaviors to align with making money. So again, we're trying to go from the chaotic world in the bottom left to the much cleaner and easier to manage the simpler world on the, not easier necessarily, but much simpler world at the top right. And we're going to do it through a different contract and a different business deal. And it's really the business deal. The contract is really a vehicle for getting to a new kind of business deal. So in our world, I'll say this fairly quickly. So performance is pretty bad. But everyone's making money. Not a lot of companies are going out of business. Maybe specialty trade contractors, maybe they are, but like general contractors and architects generally don't go out of business that often. And owners are often in the business of something else. Like Sutter Health is primarily in the business of delivering healthcare, but they just happen to have a specialty department that works in capital construction. But that's often not normal. So owners don't really often pay much attention to the realities of the world. And therefore, there's no reason for anything to get better, hence decades of not really getting much better. So the market's not there's a breakdown in market pressure in this environment. So what you want to do is say, basically, if performance is terrible, then the team might not make any money. So there's now motivation to get better. And the owner, you're working in an environment where the owner is very much paying attention, and then everything changes. And that has been our experience. We've basically upended the performance of the model, and because everything has started to change because we changed the incentive structure. So basically, the deal part one, everybody in our contract puts 100% of their profit at risk. They put it into one pool. They're not individually at risk for their individual profit. They're collectively at risk for the collective pool of profit, and they get a percentage of that profit pool. They're like shareholders in a company. And there's a single goal, is to meet our Sutter Health owners' conditions of satisfaction. This project, this much money, open on this day. And we guarantee the cost of work, which means if it goes catastrophically wrong, we'll still pay your costs. We won't pay your profit, and we'll limit your overhead, but we will pay the actual cost of the work. And we have a fixed overhead on the trade side, but it's not fixed on the design side. And then we agree to share a certain percentage of the savings, often 50% of the savings we'll share with you up to a cap. And this gets everyone aligned. We're almost like we would say in our world, based on our experience for the first time, we truly have a design and trade team completely aligned with the owner to try and make these projects successful. And these projects, the model is simple, but the projects still remained extremely challenging, and you need a big aligned team to bring these projects off reliably, time after time. So the second part, shared governance. So this is, I'm in this picture somewhere. So we have a shared governance on the contract. You have a shared governance between the owners, the designers, and the builders. And there's there's a shared governance group called the core group that manages the project, makes all the major decisions for the project. So everybody has a say. If you put your profit at risk, you get a say in how the project is managed. And this creates a tremendous amount of alignment as well. So that's key method 2, smart business deal. And then the third one, this is really, really important, and this has been most of my learning over the past 5 to 6 years, is to have an intentional strategy for growing the culture on your projects. And I'll say a little bit more about what this means. Oh wow, this is like people follow the culture. Like that's an oversight. Companies follow the money for the smart business deal. Grow your culture is people follow the culture. That you can change the way people behave day to day or every day on a project if you focus on culture. So you're trying to go from the bottom left to the top right, but how do you intentionally manage culture? And this has been this is not easy. This is very tricky. There's a couple of things I want to say about what is culture. So what is culture? I love this. It's what happens when you're not there. If the only way you're getting the right behaviors out of your team is you're there pointing and telling and being in the room and repeatedly correcting, then you're probably not there yet. You want to get to a point where you don't need to do that. The team is so on board with a new way of behaving and treating each other that it keeps going even when you're not in the room. So another way of looking at culture, and this again, shameless stealing part 3. So there's a group of partners in leadership who've done some work at Sutter Health, and I stole their pyramid and then use it in some of the training that I do now. Which talks about, it's a really good way of defining work culture. So what it says is that it's basic experiences that people have create the beliefs that people have about the world. And those beliefs will drive the actions that you take in the world, and the actions you take are what create the results. And this is very much grounded in a behavioral pyramid in academic research. So they didn't discover this, they just found a really good way of packaging it, simplifying it, and communicating it. And I think this is absolutely true. So most of the world of management in general, and project management also, is stuck in the actions and results world. Like, oh, you have bad results, you need new actions. And they don't drive down to the fact you need to change experiences. So the basic thing that needs to be done on projects is you have to create new experiences to the people on your project to change their beliefs, to change their actions, to get new results. So it's all about, and I'm going to go through a few things that we do on our projects that create a new experience of being on our project so they feel very different. So we create psychologically safe spaces. I'm not hooked on any particular definition of this, but one way of thinking about what is a psychologically safe space is a space in which team members see each other as individuals, not categories. So you don't say, oh, that, I'll take the expeditors out, but oh, that architect, and oh, that builder, that general contractor, that owner. You start to see each other as people who have children, who have struggles in their own lives, who are real people, and this automatically can diffuse a whole bunch of unnecessary name calling and blaming on projects. Help and respect is freely given and received. People can do and say what's really on their mind and they don't hide it. And people respectfully challenge one another and are not afraid to. And passion is welcome, because without passion, these projects are extremely difficult. And breakdowns, the hardest test always breakdowns in the safety of the space are quickly acknowledged and corrected, which can be very difficult. So basically, you're trying to emphasize this over and over again and course correct and model the behavior as an owner and try to change the environment on projects, because the environments on projects can be pretty toxic at times. But we try to make sure that's not the case on ours. So another way of doing new experiences is take your team out and celebrate major milestones, set up big rooms, have some fun with each other. On the bottom left here, they had, so Todd, who's on the right, was at that time our owner rep project manager. And he always dressed like that, always wore a white shirt and dark pants. And they had a dress up as Todd Day. And on the left, that is Jim, who's the general contractor's general superintendent, and he won the prize that day. So whatever that works for the team, it's certainly not a mandated celebration in a Sutter manual, but you ask the team to figure out what they would like to do to get some stress from the pressure of project delivery, because it is pretty intense. So we often take teams out for meals on major milestones, and we make sure we acknowledge them. We do on-site barbecues, but we also take teams out, et cetera, et cetera. And we build these big room environments. So new experiences, the last planner system, which I might say more about later if anybody has any questions on it, which is a different way of getting a team to plan its work together. It's highly visual, it's highly collaborative, it's extremely different from what most people have experienced before. And this is from some photographs from a project I ran a few years ago to build a new hospital in Northern California. And it's basically a whole bunch of tasks that people are just, is this really what we're doing? Is this really the sequence of work? Do you think this is really going to work? And you actually get the people who control the work in the room at the same time to clarify and get the team to build its own plan and execute on their own plan. Another one is leaders, very important, modeling expected behaviors, like be a role model for what you expect from your team. Especially if you're in the owner group or on the general contractor group, because those two groups are the most influential behavioral culture on a project. And if they don't model it, you really going to be probably have a lot of significant challenges. So you want to be respectful, inclusive, open, honest, trusting, accountable, and fair. I mean, it's a long list of adjectives, but these are some key elements of what to think about. What does this behavior look like? Well, it looks a little bit like that. And you need to hold yourself to it and acknowledge it when you deviate, because you are not going to get there right away. And key method 4, visual management everywhere you can find it to drive action. Don't put not visual management to look pretty and to impress your bosses when you walk through the trailer. Visual management to really help your team achieve what it needs to achieve. So there are elements of visual management. Create visuals informed by going to the work or allow people to go to the work. Create visuals which are accurate and use them to drive conversations about important matters. So those are some of the rules of the road of what an effective visual is. And they can take, sometimes they're easy to make, sometimes they take some work, but they're worth getting right. So for instance, this is a BIM model of the hospital in Northern California that I was the manager on. And I just put this crazy picture up because it's just trying to get people's head around how complicated the hospital is. And almost everything you see there is stuff that won't be visible once the building is finished. And this is the challenge ahead of us to make sure this is fully coordinated and it helps people. And we would go into this, fly through the model and coordinate everything to a half inch. and it gets people's head. It's a highly, you think about BIM as really a visual management tool for risk management. This could be considered how will we build the entire project visual. We use TACTime on a large clinic in San Francisco, and this is the entire build sequence plus all the decisions that are needed out of the owner and the timeline. I won't go to this in detail, but this is a highly effective way of communicating what is a really complicated build in a very simple form, and you will get people at the wall arguing with each other because they can all finally see the whole plan. And it's this ability to drive dialogue and challenge and respectful challenging that is what makes it so valuable. It's not because it's pretty, it's because it's effective at driving good conversations about important subjects. This would be considered the will it fit visual. So this is a side slice through a hospital, and this is the Gauss field around an MRI. And this is, until they did this, the team didn't really understand the challenge they had. Originally, they just had 2D drawings, Gauss field lines on the black and white drawing from the vendor, and you had to mentally say, does that work? So they actually took the time to build a 3D version of that Gauss field and put it in the model and start slicing it to figure out how are they going to get the shielding to work in this building. And they didn't really get the right conversations happening until they created this visual. The will we make any money visual? This is a team tracking the contingency, which we agreed would split with them 50-50 at the end of the project. So they're trying to get the contingency back up to 15 million. It looks like a positive trend. So there's the goal, there's the trend, and there's the current variance. And if it was going the other way, which it did a little bit later in the project, you have something that the team can react to, drives conversations. The important thing is it drives important conversations, it drives constructive conversations. It's not that it's pretty, it's not there to impress people, it's there to do work for you. And this is back to the last planner system. This could be considered a will we be on time visual. So this is a way of connecting all the very complicated work streams in a project and knowing exactly how late each work stream is and allowing teams to take action. So how are we going to get these back on time? How are we going to get these back on time? And we check in on this. We do this review every week. If it's a 3-year build, we're checking the plan every five working days. And so there are 4 key methods. Understand your project, have a smart business deal, intentionally manage your culture, and use visual management. And there are more than that, but like those, if you get those going, you're going a long way. So there's 1 concept, 4 phase of value delivery, focus on value definition, connect the other major phases together in a way that makes sense, bring clarity and alignment everywhere you can on a project. And again, the 4 key methods: understand your project, smart business deal, intentionally manage culture, use visual management, and then there's one, you could just take this slide away and just put it on someone's desk and say, we will do this. And they will go, oh, you look brilliant, it's very pretty. And then you'll set yourself on the way for tremendous success. The other thing I say is this makes project delivery simple, but it doesn't make it easy, but it takes it from being complex and impossible to being simple and merely hard. And so the projects are still very rewarding because of the challenges you have to get your team to take on. And then just so you know that isn't everything you have to do, there are tons of other things that start to fall out of those ones. And I could talk about all of these, but there's no time for that. But there's a lot more that starts to happen once you set all those other things in place. And I will always say that if you haven't done it before and you're really interested in it, try and find a project where it's happening and go see it. Visit with your peers and question them. Nothing more influential in driving people's ability to figure out how to actually do this and to be inspired by visiting a project where it's already happening. It makes you know that it's real and then it can be done. And so that would be it. That is the end of the presentation. And now questions, and then this slide up while we do handle any questions.
Thanks, Digby. I'd like to thank Digby for a very insightful presentation. Okay, we'll move on to the Q&A now. We do have a few questions already in. So first question, if you could only implement one new process on a project, what would it be?
It would be the last planner system. You don't need to have a new contract. It works anywhere. Most phases of a project, design through construction, through commissioning. If you can get a team to get onboarded and trained in Last Planner and get mentored in it for a few weeks, you can actually transform the culture just by doing that. It's a very different way of getting teams to plan work. So if there was one thing I would do, if I could only do one thing, I would implement the last planner system on a project.
Okay, perfect. A second question. What do you think the biggest challenge is to changing the way a team behaves?
I think it's in the sense culture is really weird and really sticky. I got really, it was very difficult for me early on this journey. I couldn't understand why it was so hard to like intellectually explain, like if we continue to behave the way we've always behaved, it's going to fail, look. So if we behave in this new way, it's going to be great, right? So let's all behave the new way. And then it wouldn't happen. So I didn't know about this theory of experiences driving beliefs, driving actions, driving results. And I didn't know how impactful people living in a conflict-ridden world for like maybe 20 years of their career. It makes it really hard for people to just change their behavior. And so that's the biggest challenge, is acknowledging it and having empathy for it, and knowing that it's really not about having just explaining the new way and expecting people to get it and do it. It's understanding that you have to create new experiences for people. Which is why simulation-based training is much more effective than like classroom training. And then mentoring people after the simulations in the field is also more effective, because you're creating new experiences for them. And that is the key to really long-lasting behavioral change. And I think that's the central change, is the changing the cultures and the behavioral norms on projects because of the long history of conflict-ridden environments.
Okay, perfect. One more question for the minute. How did you get your procurement department to be okay with changing your contract form?
This is a huge challenge in major organizations, but for us, so there's, for those of you that work with major procurement groups, the Sutter experience is a little atypical. Our contracting procurement group is inside our capital project delivery department. And so we actually issue our own contracts. Now, we didn't get that easily. We have a very strong reputation, and we're good at it. And Sutter does have what we call our strategic sourcing group, which I think is what would be the biggest equivalent to procurement. But they acknowledge that their specialty is in major system-wide contracts for maintenance, for procuring medical equipment, for buying like operationally focused items. And they acknowledge that their expertise is not in capital project delivery, so they allow us to do it. But I do know that getting procurement groups on board with this is a big challenge, and so I'm more than happy to try and connect anyone who has that challenge to other companies where they have successfully kind of had those conversations with their procurement groups. But I know that it can be a big challenge.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. We've no more questions. Thank you again, Digby, for that very interesting webinar. A copy of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who attended. March's webinar will take place on the 25th of March at 4:30 p.m. The topic of which will be choosing by advantages, and it will be hosted by Paz Aroa from DPR Construction. You can now register for the webinar on the Lean Construction Ireland website. Thank you again from Digby and myself on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. You can follow Lean Construction Ireland on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and through the website leanconstructionireland.ie. Enjoy the rest of your day and be lean. Thank you, Digby.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone.